Hey Titans, this is Mordecai from GamerTitan.com. In this video, we're going to be going over the child added event and child removed event and how to use them to get information across from the server to the client. So what we're going to do is go ahead and open up our project here. Now this is the same project that we've been using in the last few videos. And if you haven't watched the network custom property video that I recently filmed, I will go ahead and watch that first. So this one, what we're going to be doing is we're going to use a combination of all the various things that we've learned to get information from the server to the client and then go ahead and get rid of that object. So in a lot of cases, you'll have information that is stored in player storage, and some of that information needs to get to the client, but with player storage, you can only get it on the server. So in some cases, like if you have a cosmetic store or you have stats that you want the player to be able to see about their character or something like that, it's not always best to send it through a broadcast. And in some cases, you could use resource, but if you need like a float value or something like that, you're kind of limited there. And so what I do is I use a network custom property. And instead of having this networked object floating around all the time, if it's only a one-time data transfer, what I'll do is I'll use this child added. So if we go ahead to the script helper and type child, we can get this child added event and child removed event. And so there's a few things we need to do to set up here. And just to be clear, this is a bit more advanced. Hopefully, if you guys have any questions, you leave them in the comments down below and I'll try and answer them, because I know that this will be a bit of a more advanced topic, but if you understand this, you can use it in a very powerful way for your games. So first of all, if we're wanting to spawn something, we're going to need to make just a normal context script. And so first off, say that I'm going to go ahead and delete that ball. What we're going to do is we're just going to create a new script called data. We're going to name it data transfer template. And what we're going to do with this data transfer template is we're going to leave the actual script blank. And the reason I use this as a way to transfer data, just an empty script, is because they have the least amount of properties on them. Groups will work as well. So if you wanted, we could do a group. Oops, not a folder. Let's do a group. But you can see that they also have, like, groups have more properties. And the reason I do that is the object with the least amount of properties, being a networked object, is the best solution, because that means that there's less networking that has to happen for that object. So first off, what we need to do is enable networking. We're going to make a custom property on it called data. We're going to right click it and enable networking on it. You can see how it's enabled. And this data transfer template, what we need to do is we now need to right click it and create a template from this. And then we can go ahead and delete it from our project, or at least from our hierarchy. Don't know why it won't delete. There we go. Computer spazzing out. Okay, so we created a template, an empty script that's networked, and it has a network custom property. So now what we need to do is we're going to make a group, and we're going to call it spawned objects. Okay. And what we're going to do with this group here is all of our objects that get spawned are going to go into this folder here. The actual folder doesn't, or the group, sorry, group. So we're going to use, when we spawn it in, it's going to be a child of this group. And the group itself doesn't have to be networked. So what we're going to do is create a new script and we'll just call it data transfer. Call it data transfer manager. And we're going to just put it in our project here as a normal context script. And what we're going to do is first we need to add this data transfer template that we made as a property, and we need to reference the spawned object group that we made. And so now that we have both of these, we can do game.player joined event connect on player joined. And I know this is a lot of setup, but it's worth it for big data transfers. So we have this data transfer template. What we'll do is we'll call it player data template. And spawned object is an object. Okay, so now we have this listener. So when a player joins, what we're going to do is on player joined player. There we go. And what we are going to do is we're going to actually spawn this template here. So we're going to do world.spawn asset. We're going to spawn the template. We're going to put a comma. And we're going to put a table of properties. Sorry for the phone going off. And the table of properties is going to be parent equals spawned object. So what's going to happen is this is going to spawn that empty template into this group that we made. Actually, another way we're going to do it is just to make sure that our information gets across, because what we want to do here is we're going to want to make this a variable. And now that this is an object, we can use the set networked custom property data, and I forget what I made it. I think I made it a string. So we'll just test data for video. Okay. And so what's going to happen is we're then going to do data.parent equals spawned object. And the reason we're doing it that way is we're making sure that the object spawned, we're making sure that the custom property, the network custom property is set first, and then it's being added. The parent of data is spawned object. So let's make sure this is all working. So when we press play here, we should see an object, this data transfer template, appear under spawned object here. And it did, but we got a nil value and an old, let's delete those, and an old script. So as you can see, we now have this template, this networked object that was spawned for the player. Here's the data, test data for video. And so one more thing we're going to do is, before we actually make this object a child of spawned object, we're actually going to make it data.name equals player ID. And the reason we're going to do that is on the client, we're going to listen for objects to be added to this spawned object group. And on the client, we can listen to when something's added, but we need a way to determine, is that object actually for this player? And to do that, we're just going to go ahead and name it the player ID. So if we do that one more time, we'll click play. We can see that now the object's name is my player ID. And so what we need to do is make a client-side script. So we're going to make a client context, and we're going to call it data transfer client, and put it in the client context. And so now what we need to do is this client context needs to have a reference to the spawned objects group here. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the spawned objects group and just make it a custom property of the client-side script. There we go. And now we're finally going to get to the point of the child added event. So we're going to copy this from the script helper. We're going to go ahead and paste it. And so as you can see, it has two parameters, which is core object and core object. I know it's a little confusing. I believe it's the first one is the parent and the second one is the child. So what we do is on the client-side script, we will go ahead and add that. So we're connecting the listener to spawned object, and we're going to do on child added is the function. We're going to do function on child added parent just naming it these to help for the video. So on child added, we're going to do if child, if child object.name equals, we need to get the local player, so we're going to do local player equals game dot get local player equals local player ID. Then all right, so just to go over this real quick, on the server side, we spawned an object, we made it a child of our spawned object, and we named that object the player ID. And so on the client side, we're making sure that the object that was just added, the name of it matches the local player's ID. So it's like, yes, this is mine, and do whatever you need to do with it. So what we could do is we could then get the data. So child object get custom property data. And I'm not really sure what we want to do with this data. I guess I could just do print. I'll make a UI element potentially later. But here's the cool thing. Once we get the information about it, this object, we could do a events.broadcast to server, delete delete object. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to connect it on the server. Delete object. We will need to pass what object we want to delete. And I'm sorry if I'm going quickly. I will go back and explain. Okay, so on the client, once it gets the data, it's going to broadcast to the server like, hey, I already got the information. You can go ahead and destroy that. So broadcast it. It's going to send the object reference to the server. The server is going to listen to that. It's like, okay, we'll go ahead and destroy it. It gets the object. If the object is actually valid, then it destroys it. And the reason we would want to do this is if we only needed that information and then we got it, and then we no longer needed that object, this is a great way to make sure that that object is only there, you know, very, very quickly. So maybe what we'll do is we'll do local player client user data equals data. And the reason we're going to do this is it might be a better way to prove that it's actually going to get the information. We're going to go ahead and slap this on a tick. And we're going to print that. It's going to flood my log, but it should work. And so to go back over it real quick, if we go to template, drag this in. Actually, we need to check the server. World spawn. It's going to say test data for video. All right, so just about to verify, the only way that this is going to be set is if it actually got the information from the server. So we're going to look at this. I'm going to press play here. We might get flooded with errors because I coded that pretty quickly. But what should happen is it'll spawn the object, get the information, and delete it very quickly. Like, we may not even see that it actually got added there, but how we'll tell it worked is if it starts flooding us with test data for video. So here we go. And it did get one error, but we did get the information. And what it actually errored out on was the destroy. All right, I had some while filming mistakes. So I got it all working. What I'm going to do is show you real quick. So I'm going to click play. It's actually going to start the view for the game in on another monitor. But we're going to see, so my player is going to join roughly right here. We're going to see an object get added to spawned object. Then it's going to be destroyed, so it'll be very quick. And then once the client actually gets the information, we'll start seeing prints. So we're going to click play here. The object was added and destroyed, and now the client has the information. And so with that setup, now we don't have any networked objects in our project, I believe, unless there was something from before, but we still used a network custom property to get information from the server to the client. So what was going wrong was on the client side, I gotta zoom this out just a little bit for my sanity here. On the client side, we weren't actually, the client-side scripts load after server-side scripts. So like when a player joins the game, the on-player joined event was firing on the server. It was getting added to that folder, but the client script wasn't loaded in yet, so it missed, like, this event listener, this child added event listener wasn't connected yet, and so it was missing it. And so one crucial point that I forgot is if you're using this on an on-player join, on the client-side script, the first thing you want the script to do is to loop through the children of that spawned object group and make sure that, you know, while the client-side scripts were loading, I didn't miss out on any child added events. And so in this case, I already had this on child added event, or function rather, and so all I had to do was make a for loop that loops through the spawned objects, making sure to get the children of this spawned object. If the object name matches the local player ID, then we're gonna manually add in this case, the spawned object, which is the parent object, and the child is the child object here. And this makes sure that it won't miss anything. So once this runs, the script loads, it'll run it once, and by then this listener will have been connected. And so any future child added events, it will actually get the information. And on the server side, the reason why I wasn't actually deleting the object was because on this side as well, I wasn't doing get children. And so this is all we need to do. To run through it just one more time, what's happening is when a player joins, we're spawning from the template, the player data template. We're setting the network custom property. So in this case, it's just test data for video, but it could be anything from your player storage or anything like that. It could also be multiple network custom properties if you need multiple data sets. It's doing a task.wait on the server to make sure that this network custom property was actually set in that frame. And then once it was, it changes the name of this file to player.id. And technically we could go ahead and put this above the task.wait just to make sure that that doesn't miss. So it waits one frame, and then it makes the data template that we just spawned. The parent is the spawned object. We have a listener that's listening from the client to the server to go ahead and destroy the object. And on the client, we're passing the object ID. And so when the client does get the data, it loops through the children of spawned object. It checks the object ID equals the child ID, which in this case would be what the client said to delete. And the object is valid child, then child destroy. So you can go ahead and save on this. On the client side, we have to get that same object. So the object is that folder, or the group rather. We set up down here the object child added event. We have the on child added. And so when a child is added, it makes sure that the child object's name equals the local player ID. This is a way to validate that this actual information is for the player. If you wanted to do this with information that was supposed to be sent to all players, you wouldn't even need to do this check. Although I would suggest using a different parent for data that's supposed to be sent to all clients, as opposed to one that should be sent to individual clients. But another option is you can name this object as an example. If it's supposed to go to all projects, or all clients rather, you could actually name it like all or something, and then do a check on the child added, something like, or, you know, child object name equals all. And so on the server side, you could actually use the same group to do that. Once the client verifies that, yo, this is the object that I'm waiting for, it goes ahead and gets the data. It saves it. In this case, we're setting it as client user data. That way we could show on the tick down here that it got it. And then once it does that, it broadcasts to the server to go ahead and destroy the object. The child with the object .id, so the ID of the object. The other, like I mentioned, the important thing is on client-side scripts is make sure to go ahead and loop through the children once. Make sure that there was no objects that was meant for that player. And you can use the same function because you already know the parent object and you already know the child object if there is an object that is matching the player ID. So I know that this was a more advanced concept. This is something that I've used a lot recently for getting information. The child added and child removed is a great way to use to use this in parallel with network custom properties for data. But then the child added and child removed event could also be used for a ton of other things. So, for example, if you wanted like to have a radar script and you made sure that you spawned all of the things that you wanted on the radar to be under that parent, you could go ahead and listen to anything that changes and then go ahead and add that object on the minimap or whatever. So yeah, that pretty much sums it up for this video. Like I said, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up. And if you want more correlated content, please hit that subscribe button. I will catch you next time, Titans.